share my desktop and make this full screen. Is that working for everybody? Can everybody see that? Anybody not see it?
That's all good, Scott.
All good, can see it, thanks.
Great, thanks. Thanks everybody for coming to this workshop, which is around business planning. I have for clubs there, but it could be for leagues, could be anybody in football, really. I've participated in a few of these webinars, and they can be tricky. Either they're too generic or they're too detailed. So either way, participants may not get as much as they need out of it. So the approach we've taken is this is a pared down presentation, not the full whack. And we can go as fast or as slow as people need. And as Sam said, we've built in pauses if people want to bring in specific questions or queries or observations, or indeed go a little bit tangential. So as we go along, pop your questions into the chat, and when we pause, we'll take a time to go through them. All right. So business planning for clubs. Again, as it's pared down, we're only going to go through 5 things today. We'll just introduce myself, just to give you some context of why I'm before you. Just to talk a little bit about the industry we're in. What you probably know or may find surprising is that some of the issues that face are consistent across the game. So if you're at the top end, Champions League club, some of the issues that they face are the same as if you're in, the bottom of the National League. So I just want to give some context in terms of the environment we operate. Then we'll go into some planning concepts that we've developed over the last 2 years at the FA to kind of help clubs. We'll drill down into the actual planning framework that we've developed, and then we've pulled out 3 elements of the planning framework which are more like aligned with what we would consider business planning. So Sam's introduced herself, and James or Nicole, just a quick snapshot of my personal background. I'm a qualified accountant, spent my whole career in and around the city in investment management. Key thing from there is, from my personality, if there's a more efficient, more effective way to do things, then I'm all for it. So the things we're going to talk about are not necessarily nice to have, but things that I think will be helpful in helping clubs achieve what they want to achieve. On the football side, I guess it would look fairly familiar to some of you. Started off either playing or working with players, moved up into a club now, which I'm part of, which I'm the man of many hats, which I'll say, despite that, I think we're a fairly well-run club. And for the last 2 years, I've been working with the FA as a part of a team of consultants, working on this program and also helping the FA work on its grassroots strategy over the next 10 years, which you'll hear about in due course. So let's talk a little bit about football as an industry. I say that football is an inherently unstable industry. One, we have a spending culture. We're probably akin to investment banking, where almost every problem has a monetary solution, and every failing is probably because there wasn't enough money spent. And what we find at clubs is that those clubs who try to be prudent in terms of how they manage their finance, sometimes it's risky. If you're not spending as much as your rival, you're probably in trouble. If you're looking at membership and trying to recruit members, the club next to you is spending more and offering more bells and whistles, then there probably is a challenge. And even those clubs who've tried to be prudent sometimes often have a tough sell. If you're an Arsenal fan, prudence was one of their main things for the last 10 years, and there's always been a question about how come they're not spending more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As we move down the pyramid, workforce becomes our issue, where we're reliant on a lot of volunteers, which can be difficult to manage because clearly people have other interests and other things taking over their time. And then even down lower, we deal with non-contract players where, in a matter of a week, a player could be gone. The other thing is about facilities, where particularly at the lower grassroots level. A lot of clubs don't have any security of tenure. They're hiring maybe year to year, certainly pitches. They may not have a clubhouse, or they're sharing a clubhouse. So they're limited in what they can do. They have to negotiate with somebody else, or maybe some things that they want to do, they can't. And then there's also this question of adequacy. The pitches could always be better. Your clubhouse could always be better, et cetera, et cetera. And just on the last slide, this last bit, just to kind of highlight how deeply this instability is embedded. Some of you may know about the financial fair play rules, which at least one element are trying to help clubs to be sustainable. Well, even within there, they expect clubs to lose money year on year, as long as they average out over a three-year period. So if I was running a business and I said I expect to lose money for 2 years and then make it up in the third, you might say that's not a very stable business, but that's football. And then more recently, with this coronavirus crisis, a lot of clubs not being able to play 10 home games is a problem, and maybe putting them in jeopardy. I remember Ed Woodward from Man United made a quote along the lines of, "What happens on the pitch is irrelevant." And from a football's perspective, that's the most horrible thing somebody could say. But how many clubs would love to be in a position now where they could say, doesn't matter what happens on the pitch, whether we play these games or not, we're okay for next season. And how do we manage this? We manage this through business and strategic planning. Otherwise, you're bumping along year to year. Your time horizon is 12 months at most, and you'll be very limited in what you can do, and sustainability becomes more and more of an issue. We'll pause there before we move on. Is there any other observations or comments or questions in terms of the unstable nature or specific things to your club that maybe we can address that business planning might help? Okay, I guess not.
I've got one.
Yeah, go
on. Sorry, I know it's Andy. I play for South Bank.
Yeah.
We've got a surplus of cash from matches that weren't played last year in the Southern Amateur League. So where annual registrations haven't been put towards the pitch hire. We're currently deciding or trying to figure out how we would best spend. Is that something which I think is, well, it sounds like that's something that'd be in tune with this, and what would your approach be towards, I suppose, managing that?
So we'll get into finances, but I can answer the question now. A good idea is to retain some level of reserves. Again, the general rule of thumb is if you can get through at least a quarter or half a season with that amount of reserves, which means year on year, you're not in a pinch come the spring about registrations. I think, again, our culture is we have some spare cash, let's spend it. But the rule of thumb is, what can you keep back as a reserve? And in our club, we have at least half a year's pitch hire in the bank all the time. So if registrations don't come through, we at least can book the pitches we need for the next season, as an example. If you have, if you're more involved, you have a facility to manage, then maybe that reserve that needs to be built into your reserve. The general answer to your question, Andy, is if you have some spare cash, think about retaining some as a reserve.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay. Great. So when people talk about planning concepts now, when people talk about business planning, very often they sorry, Sam, do you want something, Sam? No? Okay. Sorry, go back.
Sorry, I accidentally clicked something I shouldn't have.
Okay, right. Very often when clubs talk about business planning, there's actually two things going on at once. So a business plan doesn't exist without some context. So in real terms, there's actually two parts. There's a strategic part. So who are you? What are you doing? And why are you doing? And then there's the execution part, which is actually the business plan. When are you going to do it? Where are you going to do it? And how are you going to achieve it? there's no reason why you can't bring them together, but I wanted to highlight for this audience, there's actually two parts. So a strategic plan is at least 3 years, as in, I don't know, a strategic plan might be, I want to be the biggest club in my postcode. That's not a 1 year, 2 year thing. That's a 5, 10-year strategic plan. And you have goals. So things that you'd like to aim for, where it's okay if you don't get them, but things that you're aiming for. And that gives you specific actions that you want to take. If you want to be the biggest club in your postcode, what kind of actions do you need to do? Maybe you need to go talk to local schools, for example. And then that gives you some critical things that you need to address in order for your strategic plan to have some chance of success. I say below that, there's the actual business plan, where the time horizon is much shorter, 3 or 5 years at a maximum. Instead of goals, you have specific targets. I want to have double my membership, a specific target. That gives you methods. So how are you going to double your membership? And as I said, there's a very defined time frame. So again, they can be brought together, but they're two different concepts. If you have a strategic plan, you could have any number of business plans. So if, for example, if you have a clubhouse, you could have a business plan to improve the revenue in your clubhouse. You could have a business plan to improve the use of your 3G pitch, but these all will sit within the one strategic plan. So I guess the first question is, are you clear on what your strategy is, and are you clear on whatever business plan you develop, how that fits in? Because if you don't have a strategy, then there's a chance that you go in all kind of different directions with business plans. So again, just want to highlight the fact that there are actually two different exercises going on. Now, under the club improvement program, what we put together is you see in the next slide, a comprehensive planning matrix, which is designed to be suitable for a club of any size. So again, your Champions League club might have something similar, and your lower league club could use the same framework. This idea of sustainable community business is both traditional and modern. So traditionally, you played cricket in the summer, football in the winter. There was maybe darts and billiards going on at your club. At the risk of dating myself, when I was a kid, midweek bingo, pub quiz, boat race was the biggest thing in the club. As in, we get more people out consistently midweek for those events than we would get out for weekend matches. So that's a traditional aspect. So it's not new, but it's also modern now, where, and if I may say, a bit European, where clubs are saying, we provide sports, so surely we can do more than just 11-a-side affiliated football. And the governing bodies have come along, where now they're kind of incorporating different formats of the game, whether that be disability, walking football, futsal. But certainly in certain clubs, not just big clubs, but in Europe, if you're arranging a hole for futsal, that means you could do basketball, you could do volleyball, you could do handball. So European clubs offer a wide range of sports, and the FA is trying to bring that in an English context to say, is there other things that you could do year round, multiple days of the week, to leverage that community relationships that you have. In this planning model that we came up, there's 9 building blocks, and they do actually build on each other. And I'll just showing you how that all works. So the idea is you come up with a sustainable business where you're actually an integral part of the community. That's the overall aim. And I'll now show you what the planning matrix actually looks like. So we take our 9 components down the left-hand side, and each of those components has 4 elements. Now, I'll be honest, you'd be doing really, really well if you got through all 36 elements and you were monitoring them and progressing through them. If you're at a larger club, there will be a person or a team looking after each one of those 9. And those 4 elements in each would be targets that they have to work to. At our level, the lower down, I'd suggest if you can get through the first element on each, as in, what is your mission? Who are you? Why are you? if you can look at what your governance structure is, and if that's appropriate, and by governance structure, I mean the legal form that your club takes. There are reasons why you might want to be an incorporated entity, a company, or you might want to be a charity, or you might want to do neither and be an unincorporated association. But I think it's important for a club to have considered why they have the structure they are. The next three are the three: organization, finances, and resources are what we kind of mostly consider as part of business planning, and we'll drill down in those a little bit deeper later on. Number 6 is about people or customers. Clubs don't necessarily always view their members as customers, but they are. They're paying for a service, and it'd be really, really helpful if we understood how they, what they think about the service and how they're satisfied with it and what we can do to improve it. 7 is marketing. How do you market your club? Which people or which markets are you trying to target? And is the marketing you're doing conducive to this? Number 8 is connections. So the big thing here is recognizing that, again, what we talked about in the club improvement program was clubs of about 40 teams, youth teams or more. And on average, they connect with, let's say, 2,000 people every week. So like it or not, they are a big part of their communities. And what we found is that a lot of clubs weren't making the most of this connection. Now, some of you may not be of that size, but still you connect with people every week. So you have a type of community going on, and there's probably more you can do other than football on the weekend or training. And then the last one, which is the ultimate goal, is sustainability. Are you totally reliant on membership subs, or more importantly, are you reliant on sponsor revenue to generate your to fund your program? Again, football is unique, where the core activity, whether that be gate receipts or membership subs, probably doesn't generate enough money to run the kind of program that you'd like. So it's important to figure out how we can diversify our sources of revenue. And I'm not going to go back into this overall framework. It's designed so the club can jump in anywhere you like. So, for example, if you have a marketing genius, you might decide that number 7 for your club is something that you can really have a go at. Similarly, if you have a legal expert, you might find that governance is something that you can really have a go at. So the matrix is designed so that clubs can jump in one of these elements where they have the resources to actually have a go at it. But my suggestion is, if you could have a think about element number 1 in each 9, at least you're on the way to some kind of progress. So before we dive in a little bit more, any thoughts, questions, queries, comments on this framework that we've come up with?
Yeah, sorry, I just have a quick one on the governance and the structure. I don't know if you'll actually go into detail on it, but that's something we're considering in terms of, is it a charity? Is it an incorporated place?
Yes.
I've had a look at the information online. It's a little bit confusing.
So I wasn't going, as part of this business plan, I wasn't going to go into detail, but we designed it so we can. So there are different reasons why you might choose a different structure. I'll start with, and I'm happy to do so, I'll start with an unincorporated. So most clubs, a bunch of people come together, say, I want to run a football club. They put together a piece of paper and says, we're a club, and they're away. That works if you don't have significant assets, and you don't own any land or buildings or a tractor, if you want. That also works as long as the club remains relatively small and the relationships between the individuals are strong. In an unincorporated organization, each member actually owns part of the club. So Johnny, who's on your board, he could actually walk away with the goalposts because he actually owns them. Which you can imagine, where as people roll forward, maybe that's not the best idea. If you can incorporate into a company, what that means is that the company owns and runs the club, and that individuals are appointed to represent the company. That means that your liability as an individual is limited. You're not liable for the entire club, and it also formalizes your management structure. Again, that comes into play really when you want to regulate the relationships between people and who does what, and if you have assets. Also, if you're unincorporated, which I found at one of my clubs, the lease was in the name of an individual who had died. So as far as the club's concerned, they had no right to the freehold land they were on because officially it was owned by an individual who was dead. That's a reason why you might want to have a club name on your leases, et cetera, as opposed to an individual. Beyond that, there is things like charitable status, community amateur sports club status, which basically give different tax incentives. Now, which one works for you depends. Very broadly, if you're not doing anything commercial for profit, a great example would be a youth club where they run particularly for young people under the age of 18. Their activities, again, a concurrent definition, are defined as charitable activities, which means that they can apply gift aid to their membership subscriptions. If you're doing some things for profit, maybe a charity doesn't work, and maybe you want to be a limited company that has community amateur club status. So I think that the details of what makes sense for you depend on your specific situation. If I had a suggestion, if an unincorporated association probably is not what you want to do long term, but you have to do what's right. The FA does have a legal firm that offers a certain level of free advice. I think it's limited to chartered standard clubs. I can make sure, I know Sam has it, Sam may have it, but if not, I can make sure that you have the name of that law firm and they can at least talk you through why you may not choose certain types of legal structures. Matter of fact, I might even have a cheat sheet from them that I can send to Sam to make available to you after this.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Was there anything specific that you had in mind, or were you just looking at different structures and trying to make sense of it?
Yeah, I was trying to make sense of it. And to be honest, I looked at the unincorporated status and I thought it wasn't the route to go down. But because it's early days, when it talked about the finer details, I was kind of like, well, actually, I don't know at the moment what the best route. I kind of just wanted to, basically what is the most common kind of straightforward thing that a club would do with, we never want to take money out of the club. So we're not looking to I don't know, sell to a Saudi billionaire. That's not where we're at. And it's not where we're ever going to be at. But I find it difficult to see between the finer details of the charitable status or as you said, there was another one as well that wasn't about the tax status. Yeah, that was the bit I just found a bit confusing.
Yeah. The main reason people don't go further than unincorporated, because just like you just said, they have no lofty ambitions. They just want to run a club for the benefit of their members. And there can be additional administration. For some people, if they're not familiar with it, then they shy away from it. So that's the downside is certain structures require a little bit, well, I say a little bit because of my background, but for others, it might be a large bit of additional administration, which some people shy away from. But this cheat sheet I'm going to send you is almost like a checklist, which basically says, do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this? If so, then maybe this type of structure might be right for you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else with any other thoughts or comments on this overall? Like I said, we're only going to dive into 3 of them. We wanted to go slow enough so that people can make sure they get stuff out of it. But if there are any other ones people want to dive into, now's the time. Or we can save it for later. I don't mind.
Without diving in, I was just going to ask if you'd be willing to share that cheat sheet, perhaps with the others.
Yeah, so yes, I might have seen me write my note. Cheat sheet is all my note. So I will send it to Sam after this so that you can have it, so everybody can have it.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's from the law firm. It's not mine, so it's pretty good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So what we wanted to do then is dive into the 3 elements which are more akin to what we consider or what we would call business planning. And the 3 about organization, your finances, what your approach is to finances, and then resources, because those are the 3 things that you're going to need if you're going to execute a plan. And what we developed is, I guess, at the top, there's the 4 components. We've asked some questions that clubs could ask themselves about this component and get a sense for where they are. So the first one is, which is a good one, does your club understand the benefit of having plans? There's no point in, let's say, a club secretary or your chairman going full guns and developing this great business plan if the people who are going to execute don't place any value on it. It will sit there on a shelf, collect dust. And in some ways, it's worse to have a plan that you're not doing than to not have a plan. So that's the first question. Before you start a plan, do you have really the wherewithal within your club to execute? When it comes to execution, this brings back in terms of the overall strategy. Does this plan tie into who and what you are and where you're trying to go as a club? Because I think it is important that the two are aligned. Is there allocation of responsibilities? Now, I'll put my hand up, and I showed you earlier, I wear many hats in my club, but I actually don't do everything. We've developed quite clear roles and responsibilities within our club, and my role is not to do things. My role is to make sure things get done, which, as you can imagine, causes a bit of friction, but we run that way. So again, we don't want to end up in a situation where there's 1 or 2 or 3 people who are responsible for the plan and the rest of the club is just kind of floating along. A review is important, not necessarily at the end, but as you're executing through, are you hitting your targets? Are you likely to hit your targets, et cetera, et cetera? And the 4th point of execution is it's very important to actually share your plans. There might be a kind of a motivation to keep things confidential, but the more people within your club who understand and bought into what you're trying to do, the more success that you're likely to have. The 3rd one is documentation. Write it down. And again, what it looks like for each club will differ depending on your situation. We have templates from the FA that we've developed, but this is my view. It doesn't matter what it looks like, as long as you've written down and committed to paper what you intend to do in a format that works for your club. It is important to do that. Because in writing it, you start to tease out these questions. Is what we're doing relevant? What we think we'd like to do, is that relevant to who we are as a club? Are they aligned? Just bringing back the strategy issue again. Are they realistic? Another example, kind of, if those who followed Leeds in the 90s, had a very lofty plan to take over the Champions League. However, the plan was based on qualifying for a certain level every year. That wasn't realistic for Leeds, and the club had a problem. Once you have these plans committed down to paper, it's very important to make sure you're actually using them to make decisions. Certainly, what you don't want is you've got a plan to move in one direction, and you find that you're going in a whole different direction because nobody's actually checked back to the plan. And again, this communication of what you're trying to do on a regular basis with your stakeholders is important. Now, we talked about legal structure earlier, but here we're talking about operational structure. So do the people, both on your executive committee and your actual workforce, do they have clearly defined roles and responsibilities? Certainly, I know it's quite easy for someone to have a task and then that same person sticks their hands up and it's like, great, Johnny's going to do it. But you may find over time that Johnny doesn't have enough time to do it properly, or maybe he's not the best person to do it. So again, as part of your planning, make sure that everybody has a clear and defined role within the club. And again, write this down. So if you have an executive committee and below them is, I don't know, your coaching staff or your volunteers, then please do write that down so everybody's clear on who's doing what, who reports to what, et cetera, et cetera. Once you have written that down, then you can then be a bit discerning about who takes on what role. So you know what you're looking for from your treasurer, for example, or from your club secretary. Again, at smaller clubs, which may be appropriate for some of you, it's quite easy for the most eager guy, person, girl to get the job. They're not necessarily the best person. And without going through this process, again, your plan may stumble because the person who's executing an element doesn't have the right skills, doesn't have the time to see it through. Following on from that, whoops, zipped ahead quite a bit. Following on from that, as number 4 is finances. Again, as I said very early on, football is a spending culture, and 9 times out of 10, whatever we do involves some kind of money. So how your finances work is very, very important. And again, it can be different for each club. If you're one of our clubs in our program has 1,000 players, youth players. So their financial framework looks completely different from mine, which is 200. But the question is, have you thought about how you manage your finances, and is that appropriate for what you're trying to do? Going back, it was Andy, I think, had the question about reserves. Straight here in under finances, you not necessarily looking to make a profit. You should be looking to make a surplus year on year and generate some level of reserves. Again, what level that is would depend on your specific situation. If you're not generating reserves, then your sustainability might be a problem. Partly what helps is, do you prepare budgets and internal accounts at your exco or to your management committee so everybody understands where the club is financially? On the last point on management, one of the biggest reasons clubs actually struggle, and certainly in the professional game going to administration, is not that they don't generate enough revenue, is that they can't manage their cash flow. Anecdotally, the biggest reason clubs go into administration is VAT, because VAT is paid quarterly, and some clubs forget or don't retain enough cash so that when that VAT bill comes up, they can pay it. And once you miss a VAT payment, then HMRC is off and running. And on to skills. Again, going back to sometimes the person who gets a role is the one who's most eager. And treasurer is probably a good one, where it's the person who has the time, who doesn't fall asleep at the word spreadsheet, is the one who gets the job. What clubs should think about is the skills that they have, and for me, the big things: do they have the time? Is this person 9 o'clock at night, the night before a management committee meeting, trying to pull together 15 spreadsheets for that meeting? If that's the case, then maybe they don't have the time to do that. Another thing is the person that works at a public accounting firm may not have the skills you need to run your club. Preparing a set of accounts is different from making commercial financial decisions. I'm not saying that public accountants can't do it, but again, just trying to highlight that there needs to be some thought about what your club is trying to do and whether that person has the right skill and the time to do it. There's also different ways. There are now frameworks you can use which actually take no time. At our club, our treasurer, there's not a spreadsheet to be seen, and his monthly accounting for the club takes about 20 minutes. But we've set up a framework such that he doesn't have to touch anything. But that works for us, may not work for you. Again, and then it's then very important to write this stuff down. So what are your policies and procedures? A big one is, do you have multiple signatories on a bank account? Or does the treasurer sign a bunch of checks that sits in the secretary's handbag or briefcase to use as and when they see fit? And do you analyze your income expenditure by activity? And what I mean by that is, are you looking at for example, each of the teams that you run and understanding how those teams perform financially? In our case, we actually worked out what it costs to run a team for a year, and we've worked out how big a squad needs to be before we're running at a loss. So our squad at our fee level, our squad needs to have 16 players in it. If we don't have 16 players at 14 and 13, we will be running a loss for that team, and that team will not be sustainable. It doesn't mean we cut the team. It means that we are aware that that team is not sustainable. If you have your own facilities, are you looking critically at how that facility generates revenue? As part of the club improvement program, one of us was in the club talking about the price of a bag of crisps. And the club hadn't thought about how much they should be charging for a bag of crisps. It's phenomenal. And then transparency. It's very, as you're doing this work and as part of your planning and monitoring, it's important that you report both internally and externally. One of the reasons clubs get caught out is the external reporting. Maybe you don't need your treasurer to look after the external reporting. Maybe there's someone else, a firm, who can do that for you. But it's a very important, easy way to be transparent, so that both externally and internally, everybody knows what's going on financially. Any financial questions before, because that was a lot. Any issues around finance in particular that people want to talk about? No? Okay, great. The third element that we wanted to talk about around business planning is resources. This is mainly about human resources, which we've touched on. As part of your plan, do you have enough people or the right people to execute? And little Johnny or Jenny who puts their hand up for everything is probably not the solution. So the first thing is there needs to be clear leadership. And we don't necessarily mean kind of a Napoleon dictator. We mean that within the club, there needs to be a clear direction and buy-in. It can be done by committee. And that has pros and cons, but it's about a culture where people support the direction the club's going in. One thing that clubs tend to do, I'm a coach as well, we tend to focus on the football, the team, and maybe not at the broader club, which will be a collection of teams. And sometimes there will be decisions that the club will take, which may have a slightly negative impact on a given team, but for the benefit of the whole club. So part of this leadership is getting people to buy into that the club is trying to do something for everyone. Capability, again, do we have the right people and the right roles? You can also be aware that there is training opportunities both inside the FA and outside the FA. These webinars are one of them. So are you looking at the staff that you have or your workforce that you have and looking for opportunities to improve their skills? And capacity is another issue. So again, particularly amongst volunteer clubs. Key thing out of that component is, do you have succession plans? So again, I'm using my example at my club. For every hat that I wear, there is somebody else who actually works with me on it. And we communicate with each other constantly. So, you know, if I get hit by a bus, touch wood, then the club will continue. Maybe it's a football thing where people kind of defer to the big ego in the room, but that's not necessarily a sustainable approach for your club. And recruitment, particularly if you're dealing with volunteers, is an ongoing process. And then the last one in terms of resources is about facilities. Just roughly, does anybody on this call actually own their own facility?
Yeah, we do. All Sonians.
Okay. So then you will have this perennial issue where there's always. Sorry, was there someone else? I'm sorry, was there someone else? So those who have facilities, this perennial issue?
Yeah. So from our point of view, we have to break even in a year. We have to make 33,000. That's kind of pays for everything.
Right.
So in my head, I have to get the 33,000. That's what I look at.
Right. So this is a great example of where your facility will have its own business plan, which will sit while the club. But when you have facilities, there's perennial issue of there's always some more painting that could be done. There always could be some improvement. But I think you just talked about kind of every year a target. I would suggest maybe to go a little further and say, think about what your facility needs to look like or you want it to look like in 10 years, in 5 years. So part of it would be to generate a reserve, a sinking fund to help you going down the road.
Yeah, we do that. I've got sinking funds. So I've got half year kind of, as you said earlier, parked.
Yes.
For 20 years, and that's great.
Right.
We're at the moment trying to do with changing rooms, which are 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's modernise those. So it's kind of, I'm looking at grants at this very moment in time.
Well, the good news is that prior to the coronavirus case, there was never been more investment available from the Football Foundation through the FA than there is right now. And they have streamlined, I don't know if you've made an application to the Football Foundation recently, but they streamlined the process where for certain things you get a response, yes or no, in 48 hours. So it has never been easier.
Yeah, we got some stuff to actually kind of look after pitches. So we got that. We got after another £500 floating around. But yeah, so we've done that.
Okay. Last one. Are you aware of the local football facilities plans? Does that mean anything to you?
No.
Okay, so each borough, the FA would have worked with each borough to develop a priority for investment, football-related investment in the borough. That's a good place to start if you're thinking about making a pitch to see what is in the local football facilities plan. You might even be in it and you don't know. So that your whatever you're going for, you can touch based on that.
Sorry, Scott, can I just interject there? If anyone's got any facility-specific questions, especially around the local football facility plans as well, and any funding you want, just email myself or James or both of us, and we can look into that separately on a club-by-club basis.
Great. I wasn't intending to go too much further than that, Sam, so thank you.
Yep.
Any other to look, just snapping back, anybody sitting on some questions about the three things that we talked about? Again, we wanted to just pull together the three which are most closely aligned with business planning, and we didn't want to go too far. We wanted to make sure that you get something out of it. Your business plan will be specific to you, so there's a lot of detail that needs to come out to help. So three things we went over were organization. Is there a planning culture within your club? Do you have the wherewithal to execute the plan? Have you documented it sufficiently and appropriately to be used as both a reference and as a benchmark? And do you have the structure in place? On the financial side, there's a question about how do you manage your finances? And what we've come up twice on this call is this idea of maintaining or building up a reserve to be used down the road. So the people who are in your finance team, for me, do they have the time to do the job that you require? It's very important to have policies and procedures, and it's very important to be transparent both internally and externally, as part of making sure that your plan is successful. And then we talked about resources where it's important for there to be leadership. Again, it doesn't need to be one person. It probably is best if there is a a culture where people buy into what you're trying to do. Very similar to resources, people need to be capable of executing. You need to have the capacity, both today and looking at the succession going down the road. And then we almost got really, really heavy into facilities, but clearly you will need the facilities to support whatever your plan is. Actually, just about an hour, funny enough. I didn't really have anything else that I wanted to get into in terms of business planning, partly because it's going to be specific to your club. I'll take away, what was I going to take away? I was going to send a cheat sheet for legal status. And there was something, was there anything else I was going to take away? Oh, and I'll send the slides to Sam after this.
I just got one question. It's about it's about the security of tenure. This is something that we've missed out on a couple of the grants that came through, because we haven't. We use our parish playing field for our pitch, so we don't own it. We haven't got any document, any formal document that says we are the team that uses it. Nor we haven't been asked to do one. So I suppose the parish could kick us off that pitch. They wouldn't, because we've got a great relationship. But is there a way of securing that? Is there a process for securing that, or a security of tenure kind of contract, a template that we could work on and present to them?
So I'll share what we've talked about in the club improvement program. As Sam said, they can drill down a lot further into the facilities specifically, but we've come up with either you can do a lease with the owner of the land, which says you have the right to use the pitches at specific points. We've come up with a kind of hybrid, which is not a lease, but it's a service level agreement, which says that the other party agrees that you have access to the facilities at these times, on these days throughout the year. So there are ways around it. In my experience, the FA usually looks for, the Football Foundation usually looks for a minimum period. Last time I checked, it was 21 years is a goalpost, but they look at each case on its merit.
So an SLA would be, if so long as it was clearly written out, had the appropriate timescales, that would be enough to actually say that you have some security of tenure then.
We've seen that accepted by the Football Foundation as legitimate. So you don't need to own it. You don't need to have a formal lease. The SLA has worked.
Brilliant. Okay.
I don't mind. I could send you a template of the SLA that we have as well. Or you want to leave that for whatever conversation you have about facilities, Sam?
I would really appreciate anything that you can send, because obviously, we've probably missed out on a few £1,000s worth of opportunity there for pitch improvements purely on our lack of knowledge of the security of tenure, really. So
Okay.
So yeah, Scott, if you can send me the SLA, I can circulate it if you're happy. But with regarding the pitch improvement program, there is a way around it. You can get a pro forma signed. So just say you might not have security of tenure, but if those who do own the land agree to it, then improvement works can happen. But pick that up with me individually, and I can go through it with you in more detail.
Smashing. Thanks a lot, Sam.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Is there any other? Again, we can go tangential. I don't mind, except facilities, because Sam's all over it. Anything else? Anybody want to talk about from a planning point of view?
I wanted to throw something in, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So obviously COVID is likely to impact on many grassroots clubs and potentially bring some uncertainty over their long-term future. Obviously, particularly those that haven't built reserves into their accounts beforehand, or limited accounts. Obviously, you've alluded to that would be the first step for a club to try and make a change to improve and become more sustainable. But if their finances are going to be so tight that this becomes difficult, obviously, particularly over the next season or two, when players might have less disposable income, so clubs are reluctant to increase their fees, are there any other small wins that you could suggest that clubs could make to improve their balance sheets?
That's a very good question. Well, I suppose in this situation, it's really critically about what you need to spend for next season. So, I don't know your situation, but can you get through with the £6 bowls as opposed to the £20 bowls? As a maybe a silly example, but an example of being really tight. What we've kind of mooted to our membership is that for this season we might not have any bells and whistles. They're going to have to wear last season's kit and make do, so that we can try to retain as much as possible. At an executive level, we've rationed that we may need to lose some teams, in order for us to continue and rebuild going forward. Beyond that, there are pretty much exhausted now, I think, but there were any number of support that's available from the government in terms of funding. Your local authority might be interested in being a little bit more lenient on its pitch hire cost if you hire your pitches. Unfortunately, there's no quick win. The short answer is tighten your belt as much as possible. The other thing that we're thinking of is whether, and I know some clubs have done it already, but we're thinking about whether we do actually reduce our membership fees, because there's an argument to say that we need the membership fees more now than we did last season. So there's actually less of a rationale to reduce our membership fees. But again, the short answer is there aren't any quick wins. There's going to be some hard thought in terms of what you can do without, and maybe you need to get small. A club will need to be smaller this year so that they can bounce back next year.
Thank you.